It started as just another routine patrol for Officer Daniels and his partner, Officer Lee. The quiet neighborhood seemed calm, with nothing out of the ordinary, until they spotted a little girl standing alone by the side of the road. She looked no older than 7, her face pale and streaked with dirt. Her oversized coat hung loosely, as though it belonged to someone much larger. Something about her empty stare and the way she clutched a tattered stuffed animal sent a shiver down Daniel's spine. When they approached her, she whispered just 2 words, words that left both officers frozen in their tracks. A sudden urgency filled the air. Officer Lee immediately reached for the radio, calling for backup. What could a child possibly say to warrant such a response? As sirens echoed in the distance, one thing was certain: this was no ordinary night, and the mystery was just beginning. As the backup units arrived, the flashing lights painted the street in shades of red and blue. The little girl remained silent, her eyes fixed on the officers but betraying no emotion. Daniels knelt down, trying to comfort her, but the words she had spoken moments earlier echoed in his mind. Something about them didn't sit right. She wasn't crying, she wasn't shaking. She was eerily calm, as if she knew more than she should. Officer Lee stepped away to speak quietly with the arriving officers. "We need to figure out who she is," Lee said, keeping his voice low. "No ID, no missing persons match so far, and she hasn't said anything since those 2 words. Daniels glanced back at the girl, his unease growing. Who was she? Where had she come from? And what could have happened that would leave a child standing alone in the dark like this? The sergeant on duty arrived, his brow furrowed as he stepped out of his car. "What do we know so far?" he asked, his eyes darting between the girl and the officers. Daniels shook his head. "Not much. She won't speak, but those 2 words she said earlier, they don't make any sense. It's like a riddle." Meanwhile, Officer Lee was on the phone with dispatch, trying to piece together anything that might connect to the girl. "We've checked the surrounding area. No signs of a car, no footprints, nothing. It's like she appeared out of nowhere," Lee said, frustration creeping into his voice. One of the backup officers approached the girl cautiously with a blanket, but she didn't react, her gaze now locked on a nearby alley. Daniels followed her line of sight, his stomach sinking as he noticed something: a faint, smeared handprint on the wall, just barely visible under the streetlights. What was she trying to tell them? Daniels signaled to the other officers to stay back as he slowly approached the alley. The girl's gaze never wavered, her tiny hands gripping the stuffed animal tighter. Every step he took seemed to amplify the stillness around them. The faint handprint on the wall wasn't the only sign. Further down, there were scuff marks on the ground, as though something heavy had been dragged. "Lee," Daniels called quietly, his voice strained. "You need to see this." Lee joined him, his flashlight cutting through the shadows. The beam landed on a trail of dark streaks leading deeper into the alley. Both officers exchanged a glance. It wasn't paint. Back at the patrol car, the girl suddenly turned her head, her voice soft but deliberate. "He's still there," she murmured. The officers froze. "Who's still there?" Daniels asked, his heart racing. But the girl didn't answer. She simply pointed toward the darkness ahead. Daniels tightened his grip on his flashlight, the weight of the girl's words sending a chill down his spine. "Stay here," he instructed Lee, who nodded but kept a hand on his holster. The other officers spread out, their radios crackling faintly as they prepared for the unknown. The air grew heavier with each step Daniels took into the alley, the narrow space closing in around him. His flashlight flickered for a moment, making his pulse quicken. Then he saw it, a small door, partially ajar, with a trail of dark streaks leading straight inside. He gestured for Lee to follow as he pushed the door open, its rusty hinges groaning in protest. Inside, the space was cold and damp, with old crates stacked haphazardly against the walls. And then, in the dim light, something caught their eye: a pair of muddy shoes poking out from behind one of the crates. Lee called out, "This is the police. Show yourself." But there was no response. As they moved closer, the sound of faint breathing became audible, slow and labored. Daniels raised his flashlight, and that's when they saw him. A man, battered and barely conscious, with his hands tied behind his back. He struggled to lift his head, his voice weak but urgent. "Help me. She's not what you think she is." Daniels and Lee exchanged stunned glances. Suddenly, the girl's voice echoed softly from the alley entrance. "You found him." It wasn't a question, it was a statement. Her calm tone sent a ripple of unease through everyone present. What had they stumbled into? Daniel's mind raced as the man's cryptic words hung in the air. "She's not what you think she is." He turned to the girl, who now stood in the alley, illuminated by the distant glow of the patrol car lights. Her expression hadn't changed, calm, distant, and far too composed for a child in such a situation. Lee moved quickly to untie the man, who flinched at every sound. "Who did this to you?" Lee asked urgently, but the man's eyes darted past him, locking onto the girl. His voice trembled. "Her, it was her." Daniels felt his chest tighten. "That's impossible. She's just a kid," he said, stepping back to face the girl. But as he stared into her eyes, he saw something he couldn't explain, something ancient, something far beyond her years. The girl tilted her head, as if amused by their confusion. "I told you," she said softly, her voice carrying an eerie finality. "He's still there." Before Daniels could respond, the man began to panic, his breathing rapid and erratic. "You don't understand," he cried, gripping Lee's arm. "She's dangerous. She wanted you to find me." A sudden, deafening crack echoed through the alley as the light above them shattered, plunging the space into darkness. The girl's voice was the only thing that broke the silence. "It's too late now." When the officer's flashlights flickered back on, the girl was gone, vanished into the night without a trace. The man collapsed, too weak to speak further, leaving Daniels and Lee standing in the cold, their hearts pounding. They had solved one mystery, but it had only unraveled a much darker, far more terrifying one. And in the silence that followed, they couldn't shake the feeling that she was still watching. The alley fell silent, except for the faint hum of distant sirens. Daniels and Lee exchanged a look, the weight of what had just happened sinking in. The man was rushed to the hospital, his condition critical but stable. He never gave any more details about the girl, only repeated the same warning: "You shouldn't have found me." Back at the station, the officers combed through missing persons reports, surveillance footage, and anything that could explain who the girl was or where she had gone. But there was nothing, no leads, no evidence, not even a record of her existence. It was as if she had never been there at all. Daniels couldn't shake her final words or the look in her eyes. "It's too late now." What did she mean? Days turned into weeks, but the mystery remained unsolved. And though life returned to normal, they all knew one thing: some questions are meant to stay unanswered.